All right, we're back. We are COMP125 in the summer 2018 semester, and it's week 12, part 2 of our broadcast. Part 1 was all about assignment 4. Part 2 is an intro to Node. So what the heck is Node and where do we get it? Well, we've already got it, but for those people who have joined me late, it's NodeJS, and you can get it from the nodejs.org site, which we've done this a long time ago. But we didn't understand what the heck Node is. So I got a little PowerPoint, and I need to go through some of the theory. Unfortunately, I normally don't do a lot of theory. I need to do a little bit of it because you need to know what we're doing. It's not as simple as, okay, go. It's not like, hey, yeah, let's just do it. Without understanding what it is, you won't know what it is, right? So we used to use this book, and I recommend this book. Actually, it's a good book on mean web development. And it's a kind of a book that talks about the mean stack. I'm not going to go through that whole book, but it's a really good book, packed book, that covers everything that you would need to know to get going with Node, a very rudimentary and basic level. And they have some really cool advanced stuff in here too. I don't have that book with me, but I recommend if you have a chance to get at it. And you can get this book through Safari Books Online and other sources. It's not that expensive, and it's a good book. So let's talk about what we're doing today. We're going to talk about, and today and tomorrow, really. I'm not going to talk too much about closures because closures. We've been talking about that pretty much all semester, how to do a closure and iffy and all that stuff. So I'm not talking about that. How a node is event-driven, that's what it is, and common JS modules, which we've been kind of using. We've been making use of modules in our pattern. My entire semester has been modules, right? Pretty much half the semester anyway. And this idea of the Connect web framework, which I'm going to be talking about, which is going to prepare us, that's probably going to be tomorrow, and that's going to prepare us more for using Express, because Express is another piece of software that's layered on top of Node that uses Connect. Connect was first, they made Connect, and then someone came up and said, hey, you know what, we'll use Connect and we'll extend it and we'll make Express, right? It's just another piece of software, another middleware, if you will. So Node is the lower level. Then there's some kind of middle software that helps us do routing. That's Express. And then on the front end, you can use any front end framework you like, Angular, React, Vue, or just use Express's View Manager. You can just use Express's View Manager, which what we're going to do here, right? And then, of course, the database, some database. Now, you could link to a traditional database. You could link to a relational database if you want. And sometimes that's the solution that makes sense. Like, for example, if you're doing a transactional database with lots and lots of transactions and items, and there's a relation between one item and the other, sometimes it's just best to use a relational database. But companies that use Node, like Walmart, right, and out there's a lot of other companies out there that do transactions, and they use Node and the whole mean stack, and they're not afraid. All right, so what is Node? So really back in the day, in 2009 is where it really started off. Ryan Dahl, he kind of presented this idea of Node.js, and it was really based off of, this idea of Ajax technology. So we had Ajax, right? And Ajax is more event-driven, like you saw that, right? We're waiting for an Ajax request to complete before we load stuff up, right? So think about, that idea of using reactive programming or event-driven programming to create a server. Okay, that's the idea behind it. Back in the day in 2008, Chrome came out with this new V8 JavaScript engine, which is the thing that runs in modern Chrome browsers right now. And that was the thing that really powered the revolution or evolution, if you will, of Node. And it created this idea of non-blocking sockets. Okay, so think about what blocking and non-blocking is. Blocking code is like synchronous. I got to wait for one thing to finish before the other thing starts, right? Where non-blocking code is asynchronous, like we've been talking about all this time with Ajax. That's why it's a good segue from Ajax into this event-driven backend JavaScript server, right? So think about this idea of we have a server that's non-blocking, right? Which means that it's not waiting for something to finish before something else starts. And but the thing is, JavaScript on the back end through Node, runs on a single thread, right? So it doesn't have multiple threads. Whereas other servers, like for example, and we're going to talk about that in a second, other servers run. I'm not going to talk about this page here is talking about the IO.js and Node.js foundation. They split. At one time, Node.js split from IO.js, and they made their own things in 2014. There was a big conflict because they didn't like the way things were going, and they split off. And Node was at like version 0.8. I'm not joking around. Now Node's at version 10. Okay, we're talking about within a year. Okay, because Node and IO.js kind of came together again, and they formed this new Nodejs.org. They kind of came together again. So both people were working together. There's still some conflicts because one group doesn't believe the direction should go in a certain way compared to another group. Why? Because this is all open source. No one owns this stuff. It's in the wild. So that's interesting too, because PHP is also open source, and so is JavaScript, right? Like you can make whatever you want. No one owns PHP. Someone owns Java. Someone owns C#. Microsoft owns C#, right? Oracle owns Java, right? And they're not open source. You need to get permission to build stuff with those things, right? And even though Apple made Swift open source, Apple still kind of owns and governs Swift as a language, right? But Node is this open source, kind of library to create a backend server. Okay, so that's really, I'm not going to go through my details. This is for your reading, for background. But the idea that, you're using event-driven programming on the back end, to respond to user requests. So I send a request, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I'm going to go to the juicy parts, and we'll talk about add event listener, which you know. But so again, a browser, the idea that the browser is single-threaded. It only has one thread, right? And it uses typically synchronous programming, right? This creates a blocking issue unless you use Ajax, which allows asynchronous responses, right? And the event loop for this whole thing might look like this. You have some event emitters and an event queue, and here's your event loop, and you have event handlers. And this is what an event would look like. Doesn't matter whether it's on the front end or the back end, right? So think about what an event emitter is. Keyboard. I hit the keyboard, it emits an event. If I'm listening to it, I can respond to a keyboard event. If I'm not, even though it goes into the event queue, I don't have a handler or a listener for it, as an example, I ignore it, right? If I have a listener, usually some kind of event listener, then when the event from the keyboard goes into the event loop, I can have a handler to handle it when I detect it, right? And I'm monitoring the event loop, that's what I'm doing, to see if that event exists. So we say we raise an event when we click some button or press mouse or move something around, right? And then we handle the event afterwards. Event listener, event handler, this idea, right? Well, the same idea is what's being used in the back end, but instead of like a mouse click or a movement or something else, it's a user request. So user requests a page, that raises an event. Hey, I have a request for a page. Okay, now it goes, and I'm going to handle the event, and I'm going to handle it with the event server, with the web server. The web server is going to handle your request and respond to it. So this idea of request response is still there, still valid, but we're using an event loop to do that, as opposed to the way that traditional servers have been listening so far. And the way traditional servers work is they use multiple threads. And multiple threads, a lot of those threads, you have to create a bunch of threads, and they're just waiting and listening, and they never get accessed. But it makes sense, right? Because imagine if you only have one thread on a traditional server, that means only one person can be responded to at the same time. One thread, you send a request, I can respond to you. You have to wait, right? It's literally like call waiting, right? Like if that old system we used to have on our phones, right? You make a call, I hear the phone call over here, but I don't respond to it. I'm ignoring it because I care about you, right? Whereas imagine if you had thousands of operators, right? And all of them are waiting. And they're just waiting and waiting and waiting. You call, but there's still 10,000 operators waiting. Bunch of threads, right? So much of the overhead, the memory, I have all this memory allocated for the server, but a lot of it's not even being used, right? The most stuff that's being used is, a few connections at a time, right? Unless you're in some kind of situation where you're doing a heavy transaction database, like an e-commerce server or something, where you're getting a lot of hits all the time and lots of stuff, then it makes sense to have multiple threads. But for the most part, most servers are literally idle all the time, right? So the idea that, you wanted to make this lightweight, server. And here's a little graph. I think I jumped a page. We're wasting our power, right? So you have this. So here's Nginx. Nginx is it's pronounced Nginx, even though it's spelled like this, right? Nginx is a node server, right? And take a look at the yellow. So this is the yellow, right? In terms of requests per second. See how that has the availability, right? And here's concurrent connections. Take a look at the availability here. So it's going to drop a little bit, but for 10,000 or more requests per second. But take a look at Apache. It starts nice, and then as it starts loading and loading, it starts really degrading in performance, right? So again, now you got to take these graphs with a grain of salt because they're trying to sell you Node a little bit. But the reality is this is truly what kind of happens, right? So we can see that then a Node server is going to be a little bit more efficient when it comes to responses from many, many, many more requests. But there's some complexity around it, right?
So this is the old style.
Old style is this part, the blue part. And look at the availability of the new part. New part is going to be stable pretty much for 10,000 requests. And here's how many concurrent connections you have. So the more concurrent connections over here, plus many, many requests at the same time, right? And you can still maintain a level of performance that's quite high, right? With Node.js, because of this idea of an event-driven system, more of as opposed to a threaded system where I have multiple threads. I don't have multiple. I have one thread, right? But I have this event loop, and the event loop is the thing that handles all these different events at the same time, and have all these listeners listening for the events to trigger, and they're all asynchronous, right? Which is definitely a way to go. Memory consumption. All right. So if you look at Apache, as memory goes forward, we start using more threads. It goes up, 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 up until you're stuck. Your server's going to crash. You ever hear about server crashing? It's because of this, right? Whereas, take a look, memory consumption, same. It's like what? Like you have no more memory consumption with more concurrent connections compared to smaller concurrent connections. It's the same, and that's really the advantage of Node, right? Of this idea of event-driven programming. So Node is more efficient than most modern servers. However, this is changing, of course. I mean, Apache still wants to be around. The Apache organization is out there. They're trying to, follow. They're trying to make things better. I'm not going to tell you that there's not projects out there that are trying to mimic what Node does with standard Apache servers. All right, it's true. IIS is trying to get better. Microsoft is, and they support Microsoft Azure supports Node, right, and other services like IIS and Apache and so on. So they're okay to it. They think it's a really cool thing, and maybe in the future it's going to be a single thread event-driven system as well. And it makes sense. If the technology is proven, then people will start adapting it. All right, this part is not something I'm going to cover. It's called JavaScript Closures, but we know what JavaScript Closures are, so I'm going to skip this part. I'm going to go into this idea of common JS modules, which we've been kind of looking at. So what common JS modules are, again, this idea started in 2009, a standard way of, working with JavaScript outside the browser. And we've been kind of doing that the whole time. We create this idea of a namespace, right? This module pattern that we've been using. And the module pattern is, this common JS module pattern, but we haven't been using this require keyword. We've been actually just allocating our JavaScript on our index.html in the correct order in order for it to be engaged in the cache of the browser. So browser cache, remember the browser, the way it works, it kind of injects all the scripts that you list in order. And then once it injects all those scripts, as long as they're in order, it's in the cache, right? And then I have access to all those variable names and stuff in memory, right? And that's what we've been doing so far. But you can actually use this idea of the require method, right? So you can use a require method that exists in common JS modules to require a module. And in fact, what you're doing is you're creating dependencies. Okay? So when you see the word require, it means that I'm going to, kind of like ask for a module to be injected at that particular point. That's what I'm asking to do. And instead of doing it with HTML, I'm doing it purely with JavaScript. So I'm going to say, hey, JavaScript in this file, I want to require this one before I do this one, right? So I need some kind of library or some kind of JavaScript code, kind of higher up. and I'm going to require that module first. So this is kind of a common JS module pattern. And they give you some examples. We're going to have something called the exports object. And the exports object is part of the common JS module pattern, also very popular in ECMAScript 2015, ECMAScript 6, right? Where you have, you're in a module. Let's say this is a module. You have a constant called message, right? And it's, of course, a string, hello, okay? And then I put the keyword exports dot says hello, which is a function. This is a way of declaring function. This is functional syntax, right? And of course, what we're going to do is we're going to output message, which is hello. It's going to say console log hello. That's what's going to happen, right? But the reason why we're doing this, just like we did with our module pattern, when we said objects dot and then the class name or whatever, we're exposing this function, this says hello function, right, outside of this module, whatever this module will be called, with the exports keyword. Okay, that's what's happening, okay? So the module pattern that we're going to be using is one module that's requiring another module that's exporting. That's what's happening. So you're going to have exports in the module that's going to be required by another module, okay? And we can also say that when you require something, there is a dependency, right, from one module into another. We need to have that module available to us in order for us to inject it into another module. That's really what it is, okay? So again, here's an example. If this thing was hello.js, this is hello.js, let's just suppose, then we can use this syntax where you say something like const hello is equal to require. We use the require method, right? And what we do is we access the hello.js file. Notice that there is no .js at the end. That's just a common thing. We don't have to put it in. It knows it's a JavaScript file because we're requiring JavaScript. We're not requiring something else, right? And then we can then say hello.saysHello. Now this is interesting because what is hello then? Hello, right, would be some kind of object, right? Because take a look, right? Says hello, right? Says hello or say hello. Did I put says hello or say hello? Say hello. Yeah, so hello itself is the object that contains everything that's inside of this module, right, which is this function. So basically what I'm saying is I'm attaching hello.js is an object, right, that contains a function that I'm exporting. And my function that I'm exporting is say hello, all right? But the object itself, which is hello.js, that's represented by that file, is going to be encapsulated in this hello variable, right, in this hello constant, actually. So then I can say that hello says say hello, because we know when we do this, say hello would be a property or a function that belongs to hello, which represents the hello.js file. This is where people get like wiped out. They're like, I don't understand, right? Because it's like, what's going on here? Why are we doing this? Because remember, there is no index.html on the back end. You don't depend on a manifest, right? You have a server.js file or an index.js file, and everything happens with JavaScript. There is nothing else. We need some kind of structure to kind of inject one file into the other. That's what's happening here, all right? And if you don't have that structure, then you wouldn't be able to form out your server, okay? So this is important to understand. So again, we can use this idea of exports, all right? So we said exports.sayHello, right? Also, the other way to do it is, here's another way of using the module.exports pointer, right? And we can say that module.exports is equal to function, right? Where we have this message, the constant message hello and a console log and so on. And then when we import it, we can say that const hello is equal to require this. But now take a look. I can just say hello because now this is saying that when we export it, I'm not exporting an object. I'm just exporting a function. There's no object. There's no outside object, right? It's when I say module.exports as opposed to exports, exports the whole object, right? Module.export says the whole function, this whole function itself is equal to, hello in this particular case. It's just syntax, right? But there's two different uses. Notice that now all I have to do is say hello. I don't have to say what I did earlier, which is hello.sayHello. That is kind of redundant. And so there's different reasons why we do this. Sometimes we want this one because I might have more than one function that I want to access in my JavaScript file, right? Here. Right? And then the say hello function is going to be exported. So then when I import it, I can attach the say hello function to that new variable that we named called simply hello. So hello is the object dot say hello, and we're just making a reference from the file into that object. Now again, this is the kind of the vault of confusion for some students. They just don't understand it. When they look at it, they're like, okay, I don't get it. You have to do it. You have to see it in order for you to get it, right? A little bit. And we're going to learn by doing a little bit in these next couple weeks. All right, so there's some core modules that we need to know about for JavaScript. Okay, some modules in JavaScript. Think about JavaScript is when we say modules, as in general, it's modular. Okay, so I'm talking about Node.js. Node.js is modular, which means you can enable or disable certain built-in modules. Not all modules are loaded from the very beginning. Okay, if I want a module, if I want to use a module, I have to require it. If I require it, whether it's built-in or external, it gets injected into my code, right? If I don't require it, then it's just JavaScript. I don't even have Node, right? Node itself includes a lot of built-in modules that we can require. And there's a few of them that we're going to use. One of them is the HTTP module. That is one of the ones that are required. And for you to know which all those modules are, I'm not going to remember all of them. If you look at docs on Node, and if you look at guides, as an example, there's ES6 and beyond, and this is the long-term kind of stable version, the LTS version, right, for the API. If you look at the API documentation, you can see that there are a ton of modules. One of them is HTTP. So there's the HTTP module, and it gives you kind of examples how to use the HTTP module in here, right? If you really are crazy about it, it talks about HTTP routing and how to set up a server and all that kind of stuff in here, okay? And these are all the built-in modules. Every one of these things that you see are built-in modules and properties of Node. Now, is there any possibility that I can teach you all these modules in 2 weeks? Hell no. I'm going to say that to you right now. You need to do some research on your own. You need to do a little bit more reading. But I'm hoping that when I give you this, if you pick up a book, you're going to go, okay, I get it. Because remember, Tom explained it. It's the modules. This is a built-in module, right? I don't have to load anything. Where is it coming from? It's built in. I'm just activating it with Node, okay? And there's going to be some modules starting tomorrow or starting next week that are not built in. Express is one of those modules, right? And we're going to use Node Package Manager to get that module, right? We're going to include it inside of our Node modules folder, right? And then we're going to require it in the top of our document, right? So any other functionality. So Node is really cool because it can get bigger depending on the functionality you want. You want Node and Express to connect to a Mongo server? Well, use Mongoose for that, right? There's a module for that. Do you want Node and Express to have authentication? Yeah, sure. There's a module for that, right? What? You want Node and Express to have some kind of other functionality? There's probably a module for that too, right? Because not all applications are the same, right? So the philosophy behind Node is let's make it modular. Whatever the developer needs, he's going to inject. The rest, he's not going to do. So if I have an application that's running on a Node server, my application is going to require different modules than maybe your application, because maybe your application doesn't need the stuff that I'm doing, right? Now, there's some very common modules, and we'll talk about those next week. But for the most part, the ones we're going to be using today, starting today, we're going to be using the HTTP module. That's going to be making our server, okay? We're also going to be using the path module. So path is also something that's built into Node, right? And that's the path module. Again, all you do to enable it is path, require path. That's it. And you're good to go. You have it in there. And then what you can do is you can do some path operations on Windows and other operating systems, right? There's also the file system, right? The file system module, which we're going to hit, right? And file system, the abbreviation, of course, is FS, file system. So the three modules we're going to see probably today and tomorrow are HTTP, path, and FS. Those are the three modules we're going to need, okay? And we're going to use those are the 3 modules that are built into Node, but we need to require them because we're using them. Next week, we won't need them because we're going to be using Express. And actually Express, because it's a module, already requires those things in the background. We don't care about that stuff. We're doing more low-level stuff this week. Next week, we're going to do a higher level stuff with Express. Express is a layer on top of Node, like I said, right? So, but these are the 3 modules we're going to need this week. Okay, so that is modules, core modules. It talks about that in here. So there's our pre-bundled modules that come with Node.js, right? And here's an example of this where we have our file system module, right? Our file system module, the way we load it into our file is const fs is require fs. Fs comes from the built-in Node file system, right? And here the file system itself, file system itself has a read file method, right? That reads the URL. Here's the URL, right? And then the encoding type, UTF-8, right? Encoding. And then there is a callback function, and this is where people get nuts again. Here's a callback function, which you guys have seen before, right? This could be a named function or an anonymous function. We're using fat arrow syntax here. This is the modern ECMAScript 6. By the way, all Node.js uses ECMAScript 6. It's compatible. You don't have to worry about vars over lets. I want to see lets and consts in your code. So you might have examples online where they say var. Please do not use var. All right? Use let and const like we've been doing all semester. Okay? Also, fat arrow functions are supported. There's nothing to transpile. Okay? So because C++ is the language that Node.js has been written in. So Node.js itself, the whole module system, the thing, it's been written in low-level C++ and I think binary in some places as well. So, you know, in assembly. So we can use, you know, this thing, and it's very, very fast on most systems. Now, the reason why it's written in C++ is it's transportable. I can move it from one system to another. I can run a Node server on a Mac or on a Linux machine or on a Windows machine. It doesn't matter. All right? That's a really beautiful thing about it. Whereas IIS can't run IIS on a Mac, right? Well, the more modern .NET can be run on a Mac, right? But mostly the old IIS could not be run on a Mac, right? Apache can be run on a Mac, but you need to Macify it, if you will. You have to do a Mac port. It's not as transportable, let's suppose, and it's a little bit different than the AMP stack that we'll want to run on Windows, right? Whereas Node is Node is Node. Node is Node everywhere. It's the same thing. You download it once you've installed it, and there's different ways of installing Node depending on the system you're on. Once it's in, it's the exact same thing when you port your code over from one system to the other. All right, so that's Node and the core modules, right? One of them is this file system. The other one we talked about was path and HTTP. And third-party modules we're going to talk about next week are Express, right? We're going to talk about that next week. And I'm not going to go too much more in detail here, but I think I've covered most of the PowerPoint that I want to cover today. You can also do your own file modules. So file modules would be if I want to load my own file, I would do it like this. I have a module called hello, and I just require hello, and that's how it works in Node. Okay. Of course, in the hello module, you have to have either an export statement or a module.export statement, or an exports.default or something like that, which we're going to get into. All right. And I think that covers most of the stuff I want to talk about today. I don't want to cover too much more theory because you guys are going to get bored, right? I'm already bored with the theory. It just responds faster. So let's do a little Node application. That's what I want to do right now. So the first thing I want to do is let's build a Node application. Okay, how do we do that? So I'm going to just lower this down. I don't need this anymore. And I'm going to keep Node up here. I'm going to go back to, I'm going to keep the Node. Remember, the API documentation online is a thing that we should always keep in mind. Okay, we don't want to lose track of this. Most modern providers provide their API right up here. And if you look at docs again, and if you go into guides under Node.js, this is what we're going to follow here for a second. I want to exactly follow this guide, which is the getting started guide, this one. We're going to copy this code, and we're going to put it into a file, and we're going to explain it step by step. All right, so let's do that. So let's make a new file, right? And I'm going to make it a new one, completely new now. I'm not going to use the lessons we used before because you can't. It just don't work anymore, right? COMP125, and it's lesson 12, right? And again, I'm not going to put anything inside here. No folders for a second, nothing. Okay. Let's just keep it simple. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just drag and drop this thing in here, right? And what I want to do here with this module is literally, and please do this with me, is I want to create an index.js. You could also call it server.js. Doesn't really matter. It's a very simple file, index.js. Notice there's no HTML, there's nothing. There's no CSS yet, right? And in my index.js, I want to copy and paste that stuff from this file, right? And I want to talk about it with you guys. Okay, so I'm going to go to this, Node.js getting started guide, copy this stuff, and then plop it in here, and then explain it, right? Why are we doing it this way? Yes. Sure. Let's do that in Slack. So I'll take this thing here, the very good idea. I'll put it up on Slack. Again, it'll be on COMP125 in the general channel. You'll have, when it eventually comes up, what the heck is going on here? I got nothing in my general channel? No. It's like Slack didn't load for me or something. Let's try this out. Oh, yeah, it's loading now. Loading history, right? I don't know what's going on. But anyways, I don't know if you got that. Maybe not. Huh? You didn't get it yet? No? That. Yay! that took a while. Who knows what happened there? Oh, I love Windows. Anyways, so yeah, so this is the getting started link for Node. And if you look at there, it's just this. Just literally copy this little this file snippet, and then we're here into our this thing as well. Okay, so you could let's go through this line by line. So first one is this: const HTTP require HTTP. What am I doing here? I'm inserting, yeah, right on the link I gave you. Go to that link on thing, click on it, and you'll get this link right here, and just copy paste. Right? And I did that by getting started guide. If you actually go to the link I gave you, you'll see this little thing on the first thing you see is this. Are you with me? All right, so we go back. So the first part is we're inserting the HTTP module, right? Right here. That's what we're doing. The first thing we do. So we say, okay, when I require something, I'm inserting all the functionality from my server on line 1. That's it. That's like how simple it is, right? Remember, it's modular. My whole Node server is modular, right? Here I'm stating what my host name is. My host name is 127.0.0.1. You can also use localhost. 127.0.0.1 is the local host address, or what we like to call the loop address for your machine, right? It kind of loops back to yourself, right? And then the port, you can specify whatever port you want. So those are the two things you need to put in there. And then we're going to make a new variable called const, or server, right? New variable called server. And notice I'm not using the new keyword. So there's no new keyword. What HTTP create server does is it's a object factory, right? I want you to think of it like that. So when I use create server, the method, it actually returns an object of type HTTP server. That's what it does, okay? And I'm passing in a function. Here's my callback function that it requires. So if you look at create server, Visual Studio Code gives you some kind of code hinting, and it says that I need a request listener. That's the first thing, which is optional. And notice I need a request and a response object. The request is the user request that says, hey, I need this page. The response is what the server creates and responds, throws back at the user. Okay, a request and a response object. Okay, so that's what I need, and it's optional. If I don't do this, if I just make create server and nothing in here at all, it'll still make the server, and then I can I can pass other objects in there, or kind of parameterize the objects later on. However, this is one of the most common ways you'll see the server functioning in Node, just pure Node, not Express. Okay, so here. Status code 200 means, remember we talked about status code 200. What does it mean? Everything's okay. That comes from Ajax. We learned that already, right? We know the status codes. 404 is not found. 200 is okay. 304 is nothing's changed. 500 is server problem, right? And then we set the header. Set header is the header of the page that we're spitting out, okay? And we're saying that the content type is plain old text. That's what we're saying, right? And then we're responding. Here's the response. So we're attaching all this to the response object. We're saying, hey, here's my request. Then the response object is going to respond every time, every single time, no matter what your request is, no matter what you put on the URL, it's going to respond with hello world. That's pretty dumb, right? It's not a smart server. There's no routing here, but it does create a little server for you. So this is the server object. That's the first part. Once you've created the server object and you've configured it, right? So the server object is created by using HTTP module and the create server method to build an object, the server object, based on your parameters, whatever parameters you did. So it's actually creating the object. It's an object factory, like I said. And then it returns the object into the server variable, right? Or identifier. Let's call it an identifier, right? So the identifier, this server identifier, it actually points to the new object that's been created by http.createServer, okay? And then I can use it. I can say, well, my server can listen. That's a property or a method that's built into all HTTP servers. I can listen for any kind of events. Remember, we talked about an event listener. It's like saying server.addEventListener listen. That's kind of like what we're doing here, right? But I'm listening on where? Where am I listening? On port 3000. And what's the host name I'm listening on? 127.0.0.1. I need those two things, right? And then after I listen, I need to respond somewhere. I can have a response object. This response object down here, it actually goes to the console of my application. It doesn't. The user doesn't see this. We see this as developers. Okay? So this, my friends, is an example of a very, very simple server. That's what it does. Okay? Yeah. The request, yeah.
And RES is just
response. Right now, you can actually put request and response. You can name them differently. This is just a very common, I don't know, think about it as a, not a best practice, but it's a convention. I would say it's a convention to use REQ and RES for request response. We could change these if you want to make it request and response, like actually write them out. It's fine too. And I've seen them that way too. But I want you to think about this as the request and response objects, and then these two request and response objects, the request comes from the user typically, and the response comes from the server. Okay, so the request, whatever the request is, notice it's grayed out because we don't care what it is. Whatever the request is, we're going to respond the same way every single time, right? If we cared about the type of request, then we would have other code in here. All right, so cool. How do I run this thing? How do I make it run, right? Well, without any other code whatsoever, and if I run into my terminal window, here's my terminal window, my integrated terminal. Again, I'm getting that with control backtick on a PC or on a Mac. Then I can just type inside my project, I can type the word node, right? And then the name of my file, index.js. And if I press enter, it's going to say server running on HTTP 127.0.0.1:3000, which is exactly what we've done here with this template string, right? Here's my template string. And this is happening here in my console window, not what you're seeing on the browser. This is for us. This is for developers, okay? You could have nothing in here and it would still run. Integrated terminal, right?
This automatically takes up the parameter RES as a response.
Automatically has those two parameters are by default what are there. If you notice, the create server takes those two things, request and response, right? And that's what it's looking for. Okay. Now here's my server, and if you look at it, it's the little link. If I press Control and left click, it'll actually generate my server, and it says "Hello World." Yay! We built a server. Oh my God, we built a Node server for the first time. Actually, we've been using a Node server all along, right? Light server has been our Node server we've been using in the background, and we haven't really cared too much, right? We've been, oh, well, Tom says use light server. Who cares, right? And we've been accepting it and using it the whole time, right? But that's what it is. It's a little Node server that's running in the background. If I do a right click and go view page source, you're going to be surprised to see that there's nothing there, right? Yeah. I ran it by going to the command line and pressing the name node, and then index.js, which is the name of my file, and press enter. Oh, did you get this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then you go to you can actually, if you look at it, Visual Studio Code, you'll see that there's a little link here. If you press Control and left click, it'll actually pull the page up for you. Or you can just pull up a random browser and type in 127.0.0.1:3000 and it'll run too. Okay? Or localhost :3000 like we've done in the past. Both are the same. Localhost points to, in our tables, in our routing tables, in the Windows machine, it points to 127.0.0.1. It's a friendly name for 127.0.0.1, right? That's what it is. So this is our initial state. Now imagine if, and we're going to get into this later next week, but imagine if we tried to run this thing on some server right now. Do you think it would work the way it is right now? I want you to think really clearly about this. I'm running on port 127.0.0.1. Do you think a modern host provider will allow you to use 127.0.0.1, their local address? And how about the port 3000? Hell no. You'll get whatever port they give you, thank you very much, and whatever address they're going to give you, because you don't know what it is. So this is only good for testing locally. Next week, we're going to talk about how to put this up online, because we're going to use an environment variable in order for us to do that, right? Because this situation right here only works in our local testing environment. And it's pretty darn limited, yeah? Okay. So notice that, I mean, I have to actually inject hello world, and the content type is text plain, right? And that's not really doesn't make sense for us to do it that way for our server, right? I could, but what file am I going to, so I'm going to respond with a file? Could I? Well, the problem is that we're not using the file server properly if we did that, right? Remember that there's other modules we could be using, right? Okay, before we move on, let's talk about TypeScript a little bit and how it can help us, because TypeScript is really, really cool. It gives code hinting, right? And so I want to talk about how to start layering our application. We're starting our application from scratch, again, for like the third time. This is like our third template we've done this semester. First template was really, really simple. We went to a more complex template. Now we're another template, another complex template. I'm going to stop the server. Here's something that I want you to think about, okay? What if I wanted to change this to hello world to goodbye world? So let's run the server again. Again, I'm going to type in node and index.js, and then it runs, right? And then I go back to my server and refresh, and you can see that here's my server, refresh. It says hello world. And then I change this to goodbye world. Hold on. Goodbye world. Save it. And I go back up and refresh. And what? How come it's not working? It's not. Wait. I don't understand. What? But no. But look, I've refreshed a couple times and it still says hello world. How come it doesn't work? Even though the servers now should be serving up goodbye world. I want you to think about it as you're close. It's creating a server instance, right? So this server instance, think about it as a new server object, right? My server object was created with hello world, hello, not goodbye world. So when you go there, you're always going to see hello world, no matter how many times you click on it. That means we have to restart my server every single time. And when it comes to development for us, that really sucks. I'm sorry. So there's a really great tool I want you to download right now through NPM called NodeMon, right? So I'm going to Control C this one down here. So Control C. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen. And I'm going to download. I'm going to say npm install NodeMon. This is the first file I want you to grab. And what NodeMon does, I already have it, but what NodeMon does is it restarts the server for us. Anytime there's a change to the file, it'll re-energize the server, so it'll show the file again. It'll make another instance. It'll close down that old instance and regenerate a new instance for us, a new server instance, right? So we don't have to restart the server. We don't have to stop the server and restart the server, okay? Now notice there's a couple things here. I did it wrong, right? I went node modules. It actually created a node modules file, and it made it local. And let me just delete this part. I'm going to try this again. And I don't care about this package.lock. You can delete that too. So I don't want that. Delete. I want to do it globally. So what's the global command? I made a mistake. npm install NodeMon. I'll do it again. And then, of course, -G for global, right? Which gives me the global installation, right? And I already have it. So it's just going to go on the global part. It'll be added on to my command prompt now, so I can use it, right? And if everything is set up properly, I should be able to do something like in my root of my folder, I should just be able to type in nodemon and press enter. And if you do that now, it says, hey, I'm starting a server. I don't have to type in node index.js anymore. Nodemon is going to do that for me, right? And guess what? It's server running at 3000 is the same command I'm giving here. But if I change this from goodbye world, by the way, there's no browser sync. Remember browser sync? That's gone, all right? That's something we have to build back in, right? If I go back to here and press refresh, I see goodbye world, right? And if I go back here and change it to hello, right? Back to what it was before and save, take a look down here. Boom, it re-energized the server. And then if I go back here and refresh, it's hello world, all right? So the only time that the server, this is a very good lesson, the only time the server is going to update and create a new server instance is when either you stop the server and restart the server or use an automatic starter and restarter like nodemon. -G. Yeah, so if you look at the command, it's npm install nodemon space -G for global. Yeah, just delete all the other files there. Sorry, I made a mistake. Huh?
Does it override the server?
Does it?
Overrides the key?
It creates a new instance. Remember, think about the server as when I energize the server, I'm actually creating an instance, an object, which is my server object. That's what I'm doing. And the server object itself, it runs with all the configurations you gave it, including all the stuff you're going to do, right? And if you change anything on the server, routing, anything, it needs to be regenerated or restarted. The server has to be restarted, generates another server object, a server instance, and then everything's good. Okay? The new instance, right? That's why I said it's a new. It's not just starting the server and restarting the server. It's creating a new server instance. That's what it does. Okay. I don't have to run the file. I just have to run nodemon. Once I npm install nodemon -G, and if I type nodemon on the terminal, it runs. If I gave you an error, then something's wrong. Right?
What's the error? Because I have one and then I asked him to restart it.
Sometimes you have to restart code, Visual Studio Code, because its integrated terminal doesn't sync back into your command. All right, are we good with the idea that I'm talking about? The idea is you have a server instance that you create. We parameterize the object here, and we're going to do that by using the create server factory. This is a factory pattern. This creates the object, which is our new server, right? And we energize our server, or we instantiate our server by using the listen method. The listen method instantiates a server object, right? And it does so when we call the index.js file through the node command. So node itself, that's the server. And index.js is what we're loading into the server. We're creating the server instance through the configurations we have in our index.js file. All right, I want you to think, I know it's a simplistic view for those people who know what they're doing out there, but it's a very easy way to understand. If you need to restart the server at any time, by the way, notice that it says you type rs. If I type rs, right, like on anywhere here in the terminal, so rs, right down here, not up there, here, right? If I go down here and type rs and I press enter, then it restarts the server. All right. So if you really want to restart the server manually, you can, right? Sometimes you have to, but most of the time you don't. All right, so that is a very simple server, but it doesn't do anything for us. Okay, it does nothing for us. Let's put this up on GitHub anyway. So I'm going to go to our GitHub here, and I want to initiate source control. So I want to kind of insert this one. I want to initialize the repository, right? Here's my repository. I'm doing everything with Visual Studio Code again. I'm going to add this to the staging area, and I'm going to say first commit this time around. I just went to this thing right here, and then I brought up a little window, and I just pressed select, and it was done. Yeah, that's all I have to do. All right, and then once I've got that and added it in, I do my first commit. Now I need to connect it to GitHub. I don't have a GitHub repo yet, but I'll make one. So I'll go up to GitHub, and I'll go to Centennial College, and we'll make a new repo, just like we've always done. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to say something like COMP125 summer 2018 lesson 12. And this will be our lesson we're going to carry for this week. And I'm going to grab these last 2 lines of code like we normally do, copy them, go back, and probably don't have that anywhere. So let's just make a new little terminal and right click and enter. And that should put everything up to GitHub. So now you have everything in GitHub. If you guys didn't do it right, you have my code. This is actually the code from online anyway. It's up on GitHub. Okay? But this is a very simple, silly thing. It doesn't do anything. It's just an example of, hey, this is a server. Yay! Huh? Basic server. That's all it is. Doesn't do anything. You can do command prompt too. As long as you just CD, you change directory into the file folder, it's the same thing. I'm just using integrated terminal here because it's easier, right, for today. But you don't have to do it that way. You can do it any way that works for you. All right, so cool. We've got this, and it's running. Notice it's still running in the background here, but it doesn't do much. And I want to start integrating some other things. One of the things I want to do is I want to use TypeScript to help us, again, understand what's going on, right? And in order for me to use TypeScript and all that kind of stuff, right, I need to initialize a npm, the package.json file, you know how we normally do. Now, there's 2 ways to do that, all right? You can use yarn or you can use npm, depending on what you feel comfortable doing, but either one or the other. Don't mix and match, please, okay? So don't do yarn, and then now suddenly you're back to npm. It'll wipe out, one will wipe out the other one. So I like to use yarn, so I'm gonna say yarn init, like we normally do, right? We're just gonna start off our lesson, so we'll say COMP125, it's gotta be lowercase, and then it's lesson 12, right? That's what our module is called. In fact, that's incorrect. It should be COMP125 S2018 lesson 12, right? And then our version is 1. You can make it different versions if you want. I'm just going to accept that. Description is, I'm going to bring this up so you can see this one. Remember, this is the package.json file. This is super important to do it now. For Node, it's absolutely required, okay?
You're saying not to use npm and yarn together?
No, one or the other, but not both. But to install locally, like into our, we used npm to install in the global scope, But for the project itself, you can use yarn or npm. Some people just use npm. You'll see it everywhere. You can also use yarn, almost exactly the same. All right. So here I'm using yarn init, and I've just started off my batch file. That's what this does. And my description for my folder is, this is a NodeJS example project. That's what this is, right? For basic, Node.js, that's what it is. And then my entry point, notice it says index.js. Before we've been ignoring this, but it's actually the entry point now. This is accurate, right? And index.js is my entry point, right? If you wanted to change it, if you want to make it server.js, you could do that. If you call it something else, app.js, you can do that too. And those are very common names, app.js, server.js, index.js, whatever you want, right? And we're going to see a couple of those next week. My author, that's me, because it picked up my author's name from GitHub, right? So it did that automatically. And my license, I'm going to leave the same. We don't care about licensing right now. Private, it's not private. And then it saves it, okay? So it creates a very simple package.json file. Very, very simple. Yes. Yes. Remember, I just went up and put it up on GitHub. All right, so this is pretty cool. This is one way of doing it, all right? If I was to do and this is my warning to you, so I'll show you the difference between one or the other. If I was to go down here and type in npm init, I can reinitialize this thing, right? And then it's going to say, okay, cool, let's go through this again. The same batch file, right? Just almost pointing it out to you. It looks exactly the same, except for a couple things. I press enter version, my test command, I didn't have that before. And my keywords, I didn't have that before. And my license, I had that. And is this okay, Tom? And then if I press enter, it adds a couple things. It adds my repository, my type, which is Git, my author, which is Tom, my license, which is MIT, my home page, and all this other stuff. This is really cool. Lots of stuff here, right? So where I go for my bugs and my scripts, this is interesting. My scripts right now, it says there's a test script. Well, you know what I really would like? A script. Let's call my script something else. Let's call it start. Instead of the script is going to be called start. Let's do this together. So my package.json file is pretty useful. I can go in there and say, when I type script, the start, so if I go npm start, right, I wanted to actually do node index.js, right? Okay. So this is like the command that I'm going to run when I run start, npm start. And the way to initialize this, if I wanted to, okay, is to type in inside the project npm start. And if I type npm start, it's going to energize the script, the start script, and it's going to run it. Now it says, it's going to throw, sometimes you get these really awful messages like this, right? It says, whoa, unhandled error on events.js 167. We don't have events.js, but it says, well, I'm trying to listen on server 3000, but it's not available. Why? Because we're already running it on server 3000, right? So, hey, yay, we're trying to do this. But until I shut this down, this server, I'm going to shut this down now by Control-C and terminate bash job. Sometimes you get this awful message. You're like, oh my God, I broke something. I broke the entire world. No, you didn't. Look at the message that it tells you. So the message was, back in here, it says, listen EADDR in use. If I see my listener EADDR address in use, that's what it says, address in use, right? This is that what's happened. That was the error. Of course it's address in use because I was running on my server already, right? And I'm trying to run it again. Can't run it again. Only one instance, right? Okay, so if I clear the screen and if I try it again, if I go no, npm and then start, then it should run like normal, like this. But this isn't not the way we want to run it. We want to run with NodeMod. I'm just putting it out there. You can create whatever script you want. For example, a build script that you want to energize. If I want to build something, I want to transpile from TypeScript to JavaScript, I can do that in a script if I want to. I can run a script, whatever script I want. We're not going to do that in our course. I'm just pointing it out to understand the functionality, not for any other reason. I'm going to Control-C this one, which terminates the batch job, clear the screen, and just run NodeMod again. And it runs like normal. Okay. So my npm, my node package manager, and my package.json, whether you use yarn or npm, it'll generate this file for you, this file that we've made already. Some of it is more verbose. Like, for example, I have this repository here and my author name and my license and my bugs. For bugs, where do I go to? I go to my issues file on my GitHub, right? My home page, what is it? It's here for now, my README page. But we don't have a README, so it's going to, crap out a little bit, right? Let's make a README really quickly online. So I'm going to go back online. I'm going to refresh the page. And you can see that I just have this index.js page. That's all I have, like one file, right? And I'm going to add a README file. Let's add it. And we're going to say something like, this is a demo project. We'll say a Node.js demo project. Node.js demo project. There we go. And that's a README file. I will commit new file. And now I have a second commit. So commit 2 commits, and now I'm going to pull it, right? So I'm down in here. I'm going to go into my PowerShell, and I'm going to say git pull. And it's going to pull from my master branch. It's going to pull down my README file, which is right here. Kind of done that a couple times. And now my README file is part of my repository, okay? And now this points actually to a file. This, if they actually went here, they would see this file, README. Now here's something interesting. So why all this stuff? Because it gives you the template to create your own Node module. All Node modules are written in Node, right? NPM, Node Package Manager. I write my Node module in Node. I have some JavaScript that I want to do. And then other people, I contribute to the community. And then other people can use my Node modules in their projects, right? I make my own NPM modules, right? And this is really good for repeatability. If I have a company and I want to make a standard 5-page site, maybe I'll make a Node module called 5-page site, and I'll go npm install 5-page site if I made something like that. And then, boom, you'd have everything that we just created over this entire semester for a 5-page site. The home page, project page, the about page, the bio page, contact page, everything's there. Boop. But it's blank. It's like just a template. And then we just fill in the blanks. And then I sell it to my customer for $2,000, right? Because all I have to do is modify the templates. I just do that kind of stuff. I'm just being, facetious here, but the idea is that you can create that kind of stuff to use with your workflow. And instead of you having to do all that again, it's just like, npm install. And then I can pass that to different people of my team. You can all have the exact same template like me, right? So we all have the exact same look and feel for our pages if you want to for that particular theme. So that's why we do all this stuff, because it basically tells you, hey, how do I get help when this repository is broken? How do I get help when my npm module isn't working? How do I do that? And this is information. The other thing I'd like to do here is let's take a look at the package.json file, right? So package.json, if I was actually going to put this in package.json file, if I was to type that in, and if you look at the npm documentation online, the package.json file is very specific. It has, just to make this a little larger. In fact, I'll switch resolutions just for a second. I think I'm in the lower resolution range. I was testing some stuff yesterday. Let's move into 125%, just to make it a little bit easier for you guys to see. And let's go back into that page, this one. And it says that it has a bunch of different properties. So there's a description property, the keywords property, the homepage property. It has the bugs property, the license property. It has a bunch of other properties that all part of the package.json file. We may have covered this before. There's also files, what files to look at, the gitignore file, and so on, and a lot of other stuff. Browser, bin. Here's my bin. My manual, right? Directories. There's a lot of other stuff here, and a repository with different things we talked about. Right? Config and scripts, and actually there's a whole tutorial on how to do npm scripts, right? It's really quite interesting if you're interested in looking at it. Dependencies, those are all the things we load, all the modules we load in are dependencies. And there's also development dependencies, right? Which we can have in as well. Different local paths. Here's the dev dependencies for all the development dependencies, right? So things we've seen before, okay, that aren't really that important. But this, my friends, is very, very important. Engines, okay? And for you, you haven't thought about engines right now. We've been doing some simple websites, right? And we're not going to port our website typically to a server like Heroku. For Heroku to work, you need to specify the engine that you're using, that you want them to use, okay? And a good example of that is, okay, well, what engine am I currently using? Well, if I was going to go to, just type in CLS, and if I typed in node minus v, it's going to tell you that my engine is 10.1.0, which is a little bit behind, actually. If you look at the current version of Node, it's actually 10.7 or something. But mine's 10.1.0, right? So that's my current version of Node. And what's my NPM version? NPM minus v, it tells me my current NPM version is 6.1. Okay, so going back to that, if I want my files on the server to run exactly the same way as my files work locally, I have to match my engine. I have to tell the server, Heroku, hey, Heroku, I want you to run 10.1, and I want you to run 6.1 from an NPM perspective. That's what I want you to do. If you don't tell Heroku this, it's not going to know what to do, and it will fail the deployment. Very simple. So let's put that in. So we can put it anywhere. It doesn't have to be in a specific order. We can just say comma, and we can say engines. And notice under engines, there's two engines in our documentation. One of them, it has to be in a curly brace like this, right? We're going to have Node, and we're also going to have NPM, and they're both inside of the same object. So we're going to say something like, so again, inside of our object, which is engines, we're going to say control space. If I put in Node, right? So Node is my first engine I want to specify, and I can specify the range. I want to say, and what this does is basically says, hey, anything greater than 0.1 and less than 0.12, that's not going to work for us. We want to say, we want to have an engine of 10.1 or greater. So greater than or equal to, so we're going to say greater than or equal to 10.1.0. That's what we want. Okay? It won't work, right? And then we also want NPM, right? Our NPM to run at a certain level. And if you notice, it says with a tilde, the tilde character basically says at. It's really at that particular level, right? Or approximately at, if you will. 1.0.20, and ours is actually not. It's like 6.1. That's how old the documentation is online, but still works, right? And in fact, you can specify the version. You can say like just 6.1.0, right? You want to be very specific. You can also say anything greater than or equal to, just like before. I want npm that's greater than or equal to 6.1.0, right? But at least it does what I'm doing now. Usually they don't have breaking changes. If you want the exact same thing, sometimes you don't put greater than or equal to, but the exact number, 6.1, 10.1, right? Because otherwise you won't get the same responsiveness, the same features. The feature set is going to be different from different versions of the server that you're asking Heroku to build for you, right? So this is really important. If I save this, and if I go back to Node, notice it doesn't really do anything, right? I mean, I can restart the server. I can say rs and enter, and no difference for me, right? This package.json file, think about it as the manifest for your server. If you don't have this file, your server will not run on Heroku at all. All right, so you need that part, plus a bunch of this stuff. Description has to be there. Version should be there. The name of your server all has to be in lowercase, cannot be uppercase. That's deprecated, right? You want to fill in some of this author and license and stuff, and you did it with either npm init or yarn init, either one of the two. Okay, but I want help when I do npm. And again, there's two ways to do it. I can use npm or I can use yarn. I'm going to be using yarn. Let's see what happens. I'll say yarn add, right, like we've normally done. And then at types node. I want to get type hinting for node, right? And then it's a development dependency. So it's minus dev. And then press enter. And then it's going to go through. It's going to go through my package.json file, which just changed. And if you notice, it just added a development dependency at types node. Now notice it says this little caret, right? This little caret is another indicator that says, hey, I want this at the latest version is 10.5.4. right? That's what my at types node is. But notice my node version is 10.1.0, right? So it's actually giving me code hinting for something that doesn't exist. FYI. So the version of that's locally installed is 10.1.0, but it's giving me code hinting for something that's better than 10.1.0. Sometimes that can be a real issue. Like, you're like, hey, wait a minute, this feature, it says it works, but it doesn't work because the feature set's not part of Node right now. Because different versions of Node have different feature sets. The older versions of Node didn't even support ECMAScript 6, okay? And of course, that's changed a long time ago. All right, so that's the way we add. We're using yarn for that. And what that does is, if I go back to here, and again, sometimes what I need to do is I need to close off Visual Studio Code. But if I hover over this now, you can see that HTTP means something, hostname can mean something, port is still port 3000 and so on, but the server is actually of type server, not of type any, right? This is really good. Also the status code, it tells me the type, server response.status code, my request and my response, which is a server response, right? As well as my listener, right? Gives me more details, and there's 8 overloads. That means there's a lot of different options here, right? So really, really cool. I recommend adding your, in Node modules, having at types, this thing is really, really good. All right, and this is what we've done before. Let's put this up on GitHub. Hey, we added some support for Node, so we're going to put that up. So I'm going to go to this. I'm going to click on this. These are all the things we added in, right? And I'm going to say something like added support for Node or code hinting support is really what we did. Code hinting support, code hinting support, or completion, if you will. Completion. Doesn't matter how you put it. Node, and then we're just going to push this up to GitHub. Yay. But nothing else has changed, really. Just did that part. All right, but wouldn't it be nice if we had a chance to have an index.html page? So we have a few files now. One of them is yarn lock, but I want an index.html page. I want to be able to run something normally, right? Well, in order for me to energize that, we're going to talk more about this tomorrow because we're going to run out of time. But let's start off with the basic structure of what I have to do. All right, so from a structural perspective, what we want is in my index.js, so far we've only included we required HTTP, but I also need to require a couple more things. So I want to require a couple of more built-in modules. One of them is the Filesystem Module. right? Which is going to be require. Now, notice it gives me a set of strings. And if I say file system, it actually shows me the file system. And notice that there's a bunch of them. Those are all the built-in modules I'm getting code hinting for, right? So I can know these are the ones that are available, right? So now my FS is really representative of my file system. That's what it is. I also want to get another constant. Notice they're constants and not lets, because they're never going to change. I'm never going to modify these things, and I never want them to change. My path is going to be equal to require, again, and it's going to be path, right? By the way, notice you can put single quotes or double quotes, and it doesn't matter. Although I have to tell you, from a convention perspective, a lot of times you'll see single quotes. It doesn't matter. I'm mixing them up here just to show you that it can be done. All right. So I need a file system path, file system and a path, those two modules. I'm actually inserting those. So just like I did before, I'm inserting the file system module. That's the built-in that I have, the bundled, that's bundled with Node. And I'm inserting here the path module. All right. So there's two different modules, three different modules I'm inserting. All right. And what I'm actually doing is I'm enabling them in my application. When I create my new server instance, it's going to have all three modules now, not just one, right? So it's going to have more code embedded. I have my host name, I have my port number, and now when I get to my server, I don't want to do this anymore. So this part is going to change, okay? So this part I want you to think about for a second, right? What I want is I want to create my file path. And I want to say something like this. I want to say that my file path is equal to dot, right? And then plus my request, here's my request, dot URL. And what the URL property does is it takes the URL of the incoming message or the request that my user is sending. So example, index.html, that's my URL path, right? And it's going to take it and it's going to say, okay, let my file path be this, whatever my requested URL is plus a dot, okay? And then what I'm going to say is something like this. I'm going to say that if my file path, right, is exactly equal to or just equal to dot slash, so there is no nothing. It just someone just put in localhost and they just put in with my localhost, they press enter. So localhost colon 3000 enter. That's a path, right? So it's empty. It's like this. That's what it'll read. The path will be empty. So if it's the empty path, then what I really want to say is that my file path is equal to dot slash index.html. So I'm saying, hey, if you go to the dots, if I don't get anything, I want to see my index.html page. That's going to be my file path. Okay. I'm kind of creating rudimentary routing here. That's what I'm really going to try and do here. All right. So this is the two things. So first I get my request URL, then I get my file path, and then what I want to do is start typing out some other stuff. So I want to create this external name. Okay, so I want to say my external name, this is, by the way, standard stuff, is my path. I'm going to use my path module now, right? And my path module dot x name, right? I'm going to pass in my file path, right? So what I'm saying is, hey, take my file path I just made, whatever it is, and I want this to be, it's a string that's made up of this external name. And if you hover over it, it tells you with the Node extension, it returns the extension of the path from the last dot to the end of the string in the last portion of the path. If there is no dot in the last portion of the path or the first character of its dot, then it returns an empty string. That's why I need to put in the dot. We've been entering the dot on purpose, right? To make sure that it accepts it, all right? And then it creates this external name, the path for my file. That's what this external name is, really, if you think about it, right? And the other thing is, I don't want a standard content type. I want to change the content type depending on what files I'm reading. For example, if I'm reading an index.html file, it's going to be of type HTML. If I'm going to read a CSS file, it's going to be of type text/CSS and so on, right? I want to be able to do that every single time because, you know, I want to be able to manage different kinds of files. So again, I'm going to say my content type, right? It's going to be equal to, by default, I'm going to say that it is of type text/HTML because that's mostly the files that I'm using, right? So that's the second thing I'm going to run. Then I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say that I want to switch, right? I want to switch the external name, whatever the name is, right? So X name, the file that the object that I created, whatever the file path I'm getting, and depending on the extension type, right? So whatever the extension name, right, of my file path, .html, .css, .js, .jpeg, .png, whatever it is, I want to be able to handle it. So I'm going to say something like case.js. That's a possibility, right? I want to do something, right? And what about if it's something else? Case, .css. That's also possible, right? Then do something else. Do something with CSS files, right? And you know what? How about other things? Case, maybe we have some kind of JSON files, right? I want to be able to load JSON files too, right? And you can see how crazy this gets. I can keep going for all different file types I want to handle. Well, the default is, right, that's the default up here. So if it's not one of those, my content type is going to be this. If it's not one of these, I'm not going to look at .html. It's always going to be this unless it's one of these. That's what's going to happen, right? And again, there's other ways of making this thing a little less sillier. And I can say that just .png is of type whatever. And then let's say there's also maybe some JPEG images, right? And let's say there's also some kind of wave files. You want to play some sounds. I don't know why we do that, but these are the things you can do. You can kind of search through this. And then what I want to say is that I want to change the content type. I want to say that my content type is going to be different depending on what it is. For example, for JS, it's going to be text/JavaScript, right? And for my, I'm just going to copy paste here just to get this done because we're running out of time. And then for my content type for CSS, again, it's text/CSS, right? And my content type for JSON, right, again, is going to be application/JSON. This is a little different, right? All right, and then for my PNG, we're going to have image/PNG, right? By the way, I can't remember all this. I'm definitely looking it up. Image/PNG, because there's too many of them, right? And because it's of type image. So I'm actually telling, my server what each of these things are. Now, this is pretty rudimentary. And you're going to like, wow, Tom, you're reinventing the wheel, right? Yeah, I am, because I'm making a server from scratch. That's what I'm doing here, right? So, of course, I got to tell it what to do. Because, by the way, Node is dumb. It doesn't know anything. You got to program every little piece of it, how it works, where it looks, how it does things, how it loads stuff. You do all that by yourself. And then you're going to say something like this. You're going to say, but I don't understand. Why would anyone do this kind of stuff? Because you have control, right? Once we have these content types, right, then on the bottom here, what I could simply do is I could start using the file system. And the file system would be something like filesystem dot, and I want to read my file, right? So I want to read file. Now, if you notice, the file system takes a bunch of stuff. The path, right? In this case, what is it? File path, right? Because that's the file path of the one, index.html, or whatever it's going to be. All right? And then the next parameter is going to be a function, right? And notice my function is going to have a bunch of things. The error as well as a data buffer, right? So I'm going to call it error, and I could call it buffer if I want to, or I could call it content, whatever I want to call it, right? So let's call it content. That makes more sense. And remember, this is a inline, function, right? And I want to do in here what I did before, right? Okay, cool. So now that I've got these things, right, what we traditionally do is we detect if there's an error. First thing we do, is there an error? If there is, then do something. If not, else, then do something else. Okay, typically we want to see if there's an error. If there's an error, that means we can find the file didn't load properly, the server's broken, like lots of possibilities for errors here when we're loading something from the file system. Hey, file system, get something. Okay, but I didn't find what I'm supposed to get. How about this one? In the case where my error.code, if my error code is equal to, and this is a special error code, right? and it's no entry. So I didn't find anything, right? In case I didn't find something. This is like I didn't find my file, right? That's a special error code. By the way, you can look up all the error codes, right? If you really want to. If this is the case, then really what I have is I want to actually read another file. I want a filesystem.read file, a different file altogether, where instead of my file path, I want to read something called /404.html. I don't have that right now, but I will. And I want to have another error, right, as well as some kind of content that I want to read in here. This is where you guys who know JavaScript are going to go, eh? What's going on here? I have a function within a function within a function, and we have that instead of another function. And this is where Node.js gets criticized for something called callback hell, right? Where we have a callback within a callback within a callback. So this is a callback function. This is what this is. Remember this function right here? And this function right here is instead of another function. There's another callback function right here, right? There's another callback function. We can have one function, another function. So what this says, hey, well, if I get an error and I can't find it, then go to 404. But what if it's not this error? Well, it could be some other error, right? Some other funky error altogether. And if that's the case, it's some kind of server error. I don't know what it is, but if it's not that, it's some kind of server. So all I'm doing is scaffolding out my chain, right, that I'm doing. All right, so if it's a 404, then what I want to do is I want a response dot, and I want to write head. When I write head, I'm actually writing the head of my document, which is very, very important. It's actually the headers, the header of your HTML. I'm responding with a message, and that message tells the browser how to handle what I'm doing, right? So what I'm saying is I'm responding with a status code of 200, and this time I'm responding with an object that includes a content type, a content type parameter, right? And the content type that I'm going to be responding with is whatever my content type is. Okay, in this particular case, probably HTML. And I'm loading a 404.html, right? So that's my write head. And then I must always end the response with a res end. My res end is going to respond with my content, whatever the content that I'm getting, which is part of my buffer, and the encoding style, which is UTF-8. Okay, so this will respond with my custom 404 HTML file, which I do not have right now. I'm going to build a custom 404 HTML file tomorrow because we're running out of time, right? So this is if we get an error that is a 404 type error. But there's also other kind of errors, and the other one that would be very common is some kind of server error. So I can respond, in this case, I'll write head, right? And I'm write head 500, which is a server error. And I could have another file that's 500.html, and I can say server error. I can respond with a server error, although that doesn't make any sense. And then I'm going to say respond.end. Remember, in response.end, I can serve up content, and I can just say that when I respond this time, I can say, sorry, server error, right? Because that's what it is. It's a server error. I don't know what the hell happened, but it's not good. Because, and maybe for this particular code, as an example, what I want to do is I also want to put in a /n, which is a new line, right? I know that that's what I have to do. Because sometimes what ends up happening is if I don't put a /n character, it won't go to the new line. It'll just like hover there. That's not cool. And then I want to do res end again, right? I know you look at it and you're like, what the hell is res end, right? Is a way I'm ending the response. Okay, a couple more things, guys, and I won't keep you anymore. So this is if we get an error. But what about if we get a good response, right? Well, then I can res.writeHead, right? And then I'm going to write in the status code 200 and my end with my contents, just like I did before. Actually, it's almost a copy of the other one. Exactly, it is UTF-8. And what this will do is we'll respond with whatever content I have. Guys, this is your basic server that'll give you anything you want from it. Okay? Huh? It's just a basic setup for the server, like really, really basic. It doesn't do Ajax, it doesn't do injection, it doesn't do any of that stuff. It literally does just the basics. And to understand this, and again, I said really quickly, let's just do this really quickly. I make a new file called index.html. And in my index.html, I'll just do an HTML file, basic setup that says something like an H1. I won't change anything. H1 that says like, you know, hello world, right, with an exclamation mark. And just to be sure, I'll make another file, which is 404.html, which will handle my error codes, right? And inside here, this will call this 404, and we'll say an H1 tag that says something like error 404, page not found. So we're actually making our own custom, you know, error page, right? And guess what? Oh, forget that for now. Well, we could, but I made 2 pages. Okay, let's do that. So I'll go back to this, and if I refresh, I get hello world. And if I put another thing in there, if I go /about, I get error 404. We don't have an about page, right? If I had an about page, it would find it and load it. So my friends, this is our first part of our server. We wrote a node. It's a purely low-level server. It doesn't do anything but serve up a file, and it serves up any file of the types we mentioned. Any other file types will not run. They'll just be ignored, right? Actually, they'll be thought of. We'll think about them as HTML files, right? Because that's the default. Whew. Craziness. Any questions around a little server we ran? The what? The code ending? Yeah. So the X name is actually using the path extension name. That's what it's using. And it's taking the file path that we're getting, whatever we get in the file path, the user types, and it extracts that extension. That's what happens. And it saves it in something called this little file called, this little variable called extension name. Then we're switching. Depending on what the extension is, we change the content type. That's what we're doing. The which one? Oh, the code hinting. Yeah. Okay. I included this. I did in my node modules. Remember, I did a yarn add. Oh, that includes all that stuff. Thank you. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow, and we'll continue this craziness.